How can we harness the invisible power of the universe and turn it into light? Today, a friend of mine will explain it to you.
Welcome to this explainer. Look, today we are absolutely not cracking open those glowing high school physics textbooks. We're not doing a victory lap for the triumphant pioneer who harnessed alternating current and lit up the globe. Nope. Instead, we are stepping right into the shadows. We're going to unravel a cinematic, haunting, and intensely psychological story about the dark, tragic price of a hyper-accelerated mind. This is the story of Nikola Tesla's final years. It's essentially a psychological thriller about what happens when a mind built to grasp the infinite becomes entirely imprisoned by its own microscopic terrors. So, picture this. New York City, 1943. The whole world is engulfed in the fires of the Second World War. But high up above the chaotic streets of Manhattan, an old, penniless man sits totally alone on a hotel windowsill, just feeding pigeons. He's basically a ghost, haunting the very city he electrified decades earlier. And here's the crazy part. While the world below is moving at the speed of his own inventions, government agents are waiting in the wings. They're quietly monitoring him, just waiting to seize his classified papers, the absolute second his heart stops beating. The final act of his life unfolds in a very specific, lonely cell. Room 3327 at the New York Hotel. And that number? It's definitely no coincidence. You see, 3327 is divisible by 3, a mathematical necessity for a man whose brain had at this point essentially turned against him. This room wasn't just a place to sleep, it was the physical and psychological prison of his final days. He spent the last 10 years of his life in this exact hotel suite. After getting hit by a taxicab back in the fall of 1937, his physical decline really sped up, perfectly mirroring his mental isolation. He became a man totally detached from human society, nursing injured pigeons in a room that just smelled of birdseed and fading greatness. He was completely isolated from the very humanity he had spent his life trying to elevate. Part 1. Room 3327. The Descent.
Part 2. The Code of Three.
To really understand his descent, we have to look at the visceral, exhausting mechanics of his daily existence. Tesla's obsessive-compulsive disorder was absolutely crippling. When he took his daily swim, he had to complete exactly 33 laps. If he lost count, even for a second, he had to start completely over from zero. He had this overwhelming, undeniable urge to walk around a city block exactly 3 times before he could even enter a building. At dinner, he required exactly 18 folded cloth napkins just to wipe his already pristine silverware. And he couldn't even enjoy a meal unless he first mentally calculated the exact cubic volume of the food on his plate. His mind was quite literally a machine running on endless, inescapable loops.
It's a truly stark, tragic contrast when you think about it. On one hand, you have an intellect of infinite scale, a guy who conceptualized the alternating current system, radar, and early robotics. But on the other hand, you have his suffocating microscopic reality. I mean, he was physically revolted by pearl earrings. Just looking at them made him sick. He had a profound distaste for touching human hair. He outright refused to shake hands, going so far as to wear soft leather gloves everywhere just to protect himself from the invisible world.
And this germophobia, it reached terrifying heights. After looking at totally normal drinking water under a microscope one day, Tesla was absolutely horrified. He actually wrote to a friend about the unseen monsters in a single drop of unboiled water, describing them as horrible creatures, hairy and ugly beyond anything you can conceive, tearing each other up with the juices. Can you even imagine being a genius who can effortlessly visualize the invisible forces of global electricity, only to be utterly paralyzed by the invisible forces of biology?
Part 3. Delusions and the Death Ray.
So as he retreated further and further from human contact, his ideas began to shift away from practical engineering and moved into these grandiose, almost cosmic proclamations. The scientific establishment that used to hail him as a titan, they started writing him off as a madman. Think about that famous scene from his Colorado Springs laboratory back in 1899. He's sitting there, perfectly calm, reading a book while millions of volts are violently arcing across the room. He wasn't just experimenting with power at that point, he was actively attempting to converse with the planet itself. That era really laid the groundwork for the extreme scientific hubris that would totally consume his later years.
We can track this dark escalation pretty clearly. In the summer of 1899, using some incredibly sensitive receivers, Tesla detected these faint, rhythmic electrical signals. By 1901, he publicly announced his firm conviction that these signals were actual greetings from Mars. Yeah, Mars. Fast forward to the 1930s, and his claims grew even darker. He announced the invention of a teleforce particle beam, which the press immediately dubbed the death ray.
a superweapon he claimed could shoot down 10,000 enemy airplanes from 250 miles away and end all war forever.
Naturally, the scientific community recoiled. Now, modern analysis actually suggests Tesla might have been the first person to detect intense radio waves from atmospheric storms on Jupiter, which is amazing. But to his peers at the time, it sounded like pure, unhinged science fiction. He was becoming increasingly isolated in a cosmos entirely of his own making, just listening to the void.
In a letter to the Red Cross for Christmas in 1900, he described the message he believed he received from the firmament. He wrote that the message read, 1, 2, 3. It is just chillingly poetic. His lifelong, crippling psychological obsession with counting, order, and the number 3 had entirely manifested in how he interpreted the literal voice of the universe.
Part 4. The White Pigeon Obsession.
Beneath all those grandiose claims of death rays and Martian signals was a really profound, aching loneliness. For all his incredible understanding of the universe, his connection to humanity was entirely severed. So, instead of people, Tesla gave his heart to the pigeons of New York. And one pigeon in particular, a beautiful bird of pure white with light gray tips on her wings. It is an overwhelming irony, isn't it? The man who dedicated his entire life to the future of wireless global communication fell deeply in love with the ultimate symbol of ancient communication, a literal carrier pigeon. He spent absolute fortunes sending Western Union messengers to feed her when he was too weak to walk himself. He treated her with the absolute devotion of a dying lover.
According to his biographer, John Jacob O'Neill, Tesla confessed the true depth of this attachment. When the bird finally died in his hotel room, Tesla said, "When that pigeon died, something went out of my life. Up to that time, I knew with a certainty that I would complete my work, but when that something went out of my life, I knew my life's work was finished." It was the definitive end, his final, devastating psychological fracture.
Part 5. The Forgotten Titan.
The story of Nikola Tesla doesn't just end with a quiet death, though. We accelerate now into a post-mortem mystery that has the exact tempo of a true crime thriller. On January 7, 1943, which, fittingly, was Orthodox Christmas, the 87-year-old inventor died completely alone in room 332. But almost immediately, the U.S. government's Office of Alien Property, working right alongside the FBI, swooped in. They seized all his belongings, specifically hunting for those rumored death ray blueprints. They even brought in an MIT engineer named Dr. John G. Trump to quickly evaluate the papers, officially claiming afterward that they were purely speculative and of absolutely no military value.
But consider the incredible irony of his legacy. On one hand, you have Wardenclyffe Tower, Tesla's beautiful cathedral of wireless energy, a dream meant for universal enlightenment and global peace. On the other hand, you have the god of war. Tesla had intended his particle beam as a peace ray to make war physically impossible. Yet the military intelligence services of the US, Germany, and the USSR were desperately scrambling to weaponize his mind. It's incredibly bitter that his ideas for peace would eventually go on to inspire Cold War military programs like the Strategic Defense Initiative.
But here is where the story gets truly, undeniably mysterious. The FBI originally recorded that there were exactly 80 trunks of Tesla's effects seized from his room and his storage units. 80 trunks! Yet years later, when his nephew Sava Kosanovic finally won a long court battle to claim his uncle's estate and ship it back to a museum in Belgrade, only 60 trunks arrived.
So I have to ask you this. What exactly was locked inside those 20 missing trunks? Did they contain the actual working secrets of the death ray? Did they hold the unified theories of a man who saw the entire universe as a symphony of frequency and vibration? Or did they just hold the chaotic, obsessive scribblings of a broken mind? To this day, parts of the Tesla files remain a complete mystery, keeping the conspiracy theories and the immense legend alive.
And that brings us to the ultimate, haunting paradox of Nikola Tesla. The world completely ignored him in his final years. They were perfectly fine letting him decay alone in room 3327, endlessly counting napkins and talking to pigeons. But the exact moment his heart stopped, governments literally tore his room apart, terrified of what he might have left behind. He was a man whose genius was so infinite and so terrifyingly vast that it ultimately cost him his sanity, his wealth, and his connection to the human race. So what do you think is the true price of such infinite genius? Take a moment to ponder that. And thank you so much for joining me on this Explain.